Chairwoman Joe Brandon, Ranking Member Graham, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this hearing today on sexual assault in our military. I am humbled to be sitting here today before you as the first male survivor to testify in front of Congress on this very important issue, and thank you for allowing that privilege to me. I also want to take a minute to thank my partner, Andy, and all the spouses and partners of survivors of military sexual trauma survivors. I also would like to thank the parents and caregivers that work so hard to keep us on a level playing field some days. They shoulder a very large load and deserve our recognition. I enlisted in the Navy in 1997 and advanced to the rank of Petty Officer 3rd Class. During my tour on the USS Frank Cable, I was raped by a superior non-commissioned officer. I was ordered by my command not to report this crime. After this crime had taken place, I was misdiagnosed with a personality disorder by the current director of the Defense Centers of Excellence for Psychological Health and Traumatic Brain Injury. I filed retaliation claims to no avail. I was given a general discharge for a personality disorder in August 2001. My petition to change my discharge from a general discharge for a personality disorder to a medical retirement for PTSD was denied by the Board for Correction of Naval Records. I carry that discharge as an official and permanent symbol of shame on top of the physical attack, the retaliation, and the aftermath. I fear it will be discussed when I apply for law school, when I apply to be admitted to the bar, even when I apply for a job. I wonder what opportunities it may destroy for me. However, I choose not to dwell on what the past has brought my way. I will graduate in May with a Bachelor of Science degree from Stevenson University in Maryland, and I will graduate in December with a Master's of Science degree from the same university. I plan to go to Hamlin University School of Law, and I choose to work towards stopping this crime in our military. Needless to say, because of my discharge, I have had to pay for all of these degrees on my own. I am here today because I am not alone. My story is all too common. Protect Our Defenders regularly hears from active duty personnel seeking help as they are being denied opportunities to report, generally retaliated against, diagnosed with errant medical diagnosis, or being charged with collateral misconduct after reporting the attack. The culture of victim blaming and retaliation while failing to punish the perpetrator must end. The Department of Defense regularly acknowledges this crisis. They estimate 19,000 sexual assaults occur each year, and 86% of victims do not report, mostly out of fear of retaliation. Of those 19,000 victims, about 10,700 are men and 8,300 are women. To translate this into percentages, about 56% of estimated victims in our military are men. This is the part of the crisis that the Department of Defense does not acknowledge. Now, just what can we do to stop sexual assault in our military? First, we must recognize that rape is not just about sex. It's about violence, power, and sometimes about abuse of authority. General Franklin's recent action to set aside the guilty verdict against Lieutenant Colonel Wilkerson of aggravated sexual assault is yet another example of an abuse of authority taken by a commander that will have a chilling effect on military judges, prosecutors, and juries, and inhibit victims from coming forward. A system that elevates a single individual's authority and discretion over the rule of law often precludes justice and hinders it long into the future. Colonel Wilkerson's victim has been in contact with Protect Our Defenders, and she wants you to know, quote, "I endured 8 months of public humiliation and investigations. Why bother to put the investigators, prosecutors, judge, jury, and me through this if one person can set aside justice with the swipe of a pen?" I have here a copy of her statement, which has already been submitted for the record, Madam Chairwoman. Reforms to date have clearly not successfully addressed this epidemic because they have targeted the symptoms without addressing the root cause, which is that the military justice system is fraught with inherent personal bias, conflicts of interest, abuse of authority, and too often a low regard for the victim. Whereas civilians have the constitutional protections of an independent judicial system, service members do not. Service members must report an assault to their commanders. However, if those commanders take action and prove that an assault occurred, they also prove a failure of their own leadership. Congress has put commanders in charge of violent sexual crime, from victim care through the legal and investigative processes, through adjudication and post-trial. Commanders have too often failed to care for the victim or prosecute the perpetrator. They have failed to end this long-standing epidemic. We also need to ensure that prevention efforts are inclusive of male service members. The majority of prevention efforts are targeted toward females. As I demonstrated, men are a majority of the victims in our military. We cannot marginalize male survivors and send a message that men cannot be raped and therefore are not real survivors. Survivors of military sexual trauma also need a fair review of their discharges. The military has shoved many survivors out the back door with inaccurate, misleading, and very harmful, almost weaponized medical diagnoses like personality disorders that affect their benefits and future employment opportunities. We need to establish a system separate and apart from the boards for correction of military records to examine these discharges and grant survivors the medical retirements they are due from the Department of Defense. Currently, the correction boards only change about 10% of their discharges. These discharges make it much harder for veterans to find meaningful employment, often re-victimize the veteran, and make it impossible often for these veterans to use their earned education benefits. In conclusion, this epidemic has not successfully been addressed in decades of review and reform by the Department of Defense or by Congress. Some of the reasons for this include men being invisible and ignored as survivors of military sexual trauma, inherent bias and conflict of interest present in a broken military justice system, the reporting, investigation, prosecution, and adjudication of sexual assault must be taken out of the chain of command and into an independent office with professional military and civilian oversight. The established discharge review process is a rubber stamp that causes lifelong harm and needs overhaul badly. It is another way that the Department of Defense fails us. Congressional legislation created these systems that are inherently biased, unfair, and do not work. It is now Congress's duty to pass legislation so service members can receive justice that is fair, impartial, and finally addresses the military's epidemic of sexual assault. It should also be noted that a lot of survivors, as the other panelists have said, do not come home. There are people like Carrie Goodwin and so many others that do not survive from their sexual assaults, and we need to do this in memory of them. Madam Chairwoman, this concludes my remarks. I am prepared for your questions and those of the subcommittee.
This has been a Sunfish production.